So I'm Oscar Clark. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Fundamentally Games. And as you all know, we're here to talk about LiveOps. LiveOps is something which we specialize in and we've been focusing on. And as I mentioned, I've been involved in live games for over 20 years. So it's somewhere I literally, like I say, literally wrote the book on the subject. So hopefully I know some things. Anyway, so let's kick off and let's just talk about what LiveOps is anyway. And as I say, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So there's an elephant in the room that a lot of game developers and a lot of game players worry about, and that is whether games as a service is evil or not. So I know that you obviously have some more nuanced views because you wouldn't be signing up to a session on LiveOps unless you had sort of a feeling that there might be some value in it. But obviously there's a lot of issues out there where people have seen bad implementations, and it's associated with things like loot crates and various other things. But essentially, I want to highlight that it's not something which is necessarily evil. You know, there may have been some bad examples, but there are also some very good examples. Fortnite is a perfect storm in some ways in terms of showing what that works and looks like in a PC console space. We can see how games like Warframe have gone from a very lukewarm startup to a very powerful momentum because of their ongoing support and development of the game. It works in mobile, we know that, we've seen it working in there. And also it's not just hardcore games. I know we've got a few people from Scopely signed up, I think, for the afternoon session. But the point is that games as a service is a philosophy. It is not just about the specific game. It's actually a philosophy focused on getting more players, doing more things, more often, for longer. And it's literally that simple. You know, more players doing more things more often for longer. That is what the core philosophy that we have, and I think that really underlines what LiveOps is all about. So it's specifically understanding how you maintain people's expectation and how you grow and scale the audience. And if you think about it, if I can get more players, that's fine. If I get twice as many players and they spend the same amount of money, great, I've doubled my revenue. But if I get all of those players to do twice as many things, I've just doubled that as well. If I get them to do twice as long, then again I've doubled that. So the LiveOps is an engine for scaling, but it really starts at creating experiences that players love, and that's really the fundamentals of it. And to sort of understand the underlying principles, let's talk about the player life cycle. So the key thing in the player life cycle is about understanding that players start by discovering the kind of the game, discovering the experience, and they've got to go through a hurdle. That hurdle could be, if it's a paid up front game, it could be the paywall. If it's a game that has no paywall, it may be, how much space do I have on my device to be able to use it? Do I have other things occupying my time? Should I be doing the washing up? Why should I give up the things I should be doing in order to play this game? So that's the first stage of any part of the player life cycle that we, as people who are generating marketing materials and generating experiences and reasons to play, have to consider. Once we get past the discovery stage, we then look at the learning stage. Now, what do we mean by that? So yes, you have to learn the controls. You've got the whole first-time user experience, which can kill so many experiences, so many games, if it's done wrongly. But there's a second part to the learning stage, and that is, how does the game fit into your daily routine? Players have to learn if they're going to choose this game, your game, to be the one they continue playing. The one that they're going to play tomorrow, the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, the next 4, 10 years. I don't see people stopping playing Clash Royale anytime soon, or maybe better still, Clash of Clans. So when you look at games like that, what drives their success is the fact that the game is designed and scalable and engaging enough to draw you back in and create habitual behavior. So if we don't get that right, players churn. Now, that's not necessarily the end for certain games. Now, obviously, if you've got a paid up front game, or if you've got a game that is a single process, a single nugget of joy. Now, okay, you can replay the Stanley Parable in numbers of endings, and my favorite ending is the broom covered ending. For those of you who played it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Those of you who don't, well, you should just go play it. This is something that wouldn't make sense as a live service. Well, I think it'd be very difficult to run as a live service. Similarly, the room. I remember talking to Barry at Fireproof about why didn't he make a endlessly replayable game with, because it's beautiful and it's amazing, but its intention is a single moment of pleasure, a single kind of process, a completion at the end of it. And then they obviously produce more games. So for games like that, product management is the answer. So we manage the long tail, we manage the sale prices, and we build a portfolio of content to maintain the brand of the game studio. But that's not what we're talking about. For us, we're talking about live ops. So what does live ops mean? It means live, long-term engagement. And obviously we can look at the super, kings of this world, the Dota 2s, and the way that esports has affected a game like that. Obviously the scale of that is enormous, but there are lessons that we can learn from that. And then lessons in mobile as well. Look at Clash Royale, look at the way that they've worked in seasons. Also look at the limitations on the scale. Why hasn't Clash Royale scaled at the same level of Clash of Clans and things like that? There are lots of really interesting lessons we can learn from games that are already out there. But essentially, the key thing that drives them is live ops. And what that means is we then enter the next stage of the player life cycle, engaging. So once we've had the learning experience, which will be, as I said, the worst experience of them playing this game because they've got to learn the controls and they've got to learn how it fits into their lifestyle, we then get those people to re-engage, to actually kind of be part of it and to feel that they're bonding. And that's where they really start learning about the scope of the game, learning about the value of grind, the value of engagement, the value of whatever it is that game has. But it doesn't end there. We want to try and escalate people's engagement to the point where they super engage. Now, the term whale is something I don't like. I think whale is the wrong term, and it's used by a lot of people because it's a shorthand. But whales is a gambling term for the guys who turn up in Vegas with 50 grand or 100 grand and they stay until they've run out of money. That's what they do. That type of behavior is an indulgent expression of sheer kind of spend. However, that's not what people do games for. That's not what the high spenders, in my opinion, and the data I've seen, that's not what the high spenders are about. Generally, the high spenders are people who are treating the game as a hobby, as an experience, their go-to thing. I remember back in the early days, I think it was like 2011 or something, or maybe a bit later than that, there was a game called X-City where a woman was spending, I think she spent $35,000 in 9 months. That's a lot of money for most people. But she was a Chinese footballer's wife, and she had a friends group who were other Chinese footballers' wives, and they were showing off to each other how much they could spend. And it was their pleasure to do so. I'm not going to deny them their pleasure. I may not want to do that myself, but we have to realize that for some people, spending $5 a month is extravagant in a game. For other people, $35,000 over 9 months is okay. Every super engaged player has a different threshold, but understanding what their threshold is and how we engage them so they feel that they're getting reward, value, pleasure, delight, satisfaction from playing, that is what we mean by super engaged. And you can even argue people who don't spend money, people who just use ads, for example, they're still contributing to the game's bottom line, and they're contributing to the engagement of other players, and they are fulfilling their maximum super engagement limit for that game for them. So understanding that's important, and also understanding that we have to keep their sustained interest, and that's where re-engagement becomes really important. So if you think about it, that's what LiveOps is about, is creating reasons to engage, to super engage, and to re-engage, and keeping that momentum up. Another way of looking at it is to look at the game as a funnel. So obviously, as you have user acquisition and organic discovery and social engagement, your discovery pool is going to be quite large. As you go from discovery to learning, you're going to lose some people. As you go from learning to engaging, you're going to lose some people. Eventually, you get down to those who are super engaging. Our job in LiveOps is to help with the activation and conversion of players. But it's also to manage that kind of expectation. So community is often driven by the actions and the choices and the purchases of the super engaging players, which can delight and excite the engaging users, building that momentum. And I want to be like that guy. I want to have the outfit that that guy chose, that woman chose, that person chose. That it doesn't matter what it is. I'm excited by the way they play. That's all part of the community development, and we need to foster and support that, because then we get this virtuous circle of conversion to community, from community to conversion. But also, if we activate that engaging group through live operations, we can actually reach out beyond the game playing community and start feeding into the user acquisition process, whether that's through social engagement, through word of mouth. Word of mouth still is one of the most important factors of the success of any game, and also feeding in the activities, the regular frequency of activity that we're doing into our user acquisition design. Again, virtuous circles. So have I really answered what LiveOps is anyway? Of course not, but there's another layer to it. So I look at it as a kind of an engine, a looped engine. So we start with events. I'm really focused on thinking about game events. So what are events? We'll talk about in a bit. A promotion, so how we turn event activity into revenue potential for the game. I also think that content is a component of that. Frequency and predictability of that's really important. We'll get to that later. And also features. Unless we're continuously updating the game and engaging with the game feels dead. If the game feels dead, guess what? People stop playing. All of this feeds into the community, and we need to make sure that we're using the community to help us drive growth and revenue through those events, through those promotions. So creating an engine for success, an engine for scale, because as I said before, we're looking for more players doing more things more often for longer. So let's talk about what events are. And by the way, feel free to ask questions as we go along. So what are events? They could be any number of things. We could have a brand new, Skeleton King in Clash of Clans. You could have the festive, some of these images are a bit low, some festive event in GTA. We can have the Marshmallow performance in fact, there's been bigger performances in Fortnite since. I should pay attention and update this image. There are a number of different activities and events which can be managed. Some of them are going to be retail based, but that's what we call promotions. We're focused on the activity that drives play. For me, events are about driving retention and engagement. So if you focus your idea about events around how do we get people playing, how do we create anticipation, excitement, and fear of missing out, that will drive activity. And if we can drive activity, the rest will follow. So to follow that through, let's think about then breaking that down. So creating daily routines, creating a reason why people want to be back tomorrow, why they're going to be fulfilled by coming back tomorrow, how we satisfy and delight them. We need to be testing what happens when we have daily activities and routines. We need to see what's working, what's delighting, and we need to use the data to help us improve the design of those activities and events. Every game is going to have a different implementation. Some games it's going to be reaching a target score. Other games it's retrying a different level and getting a different outcome, or doing it faster, or whatever it might be. Others will have dynamically created activity. One of my favorite games at the moment I'm playing on console is Slay the Spire, and it's a simple, easy game. They have a daily challenge where you have a particular character with a particular set of configurations and you play it. And I love that, except it's just programmatic. There's no explanation, there's no community, there's no kind of excitement around it. It would be so much better if there was some live activity that drove me to do that. Now, of course, in that game as well, there's no upsell. So there's no opportunity for them to make value out of it. But it just shows that if we have live, regular activity that we know will delight us, that will challenge our way of playing, that will create excitement, that can be great, and that can help drive routines. I'm not talking about manipulation at all. I'm talking about setting up delight. Because what is a game for? It's something where we can express ourselves, we can lose ourselves, that has no consequence on our outside game activity, our real world activity. And that space that games offer, we want more of each time. You know, we want to find something that delights us. And I get very frustrated, and I'm sure lots of us do, where a game could have so much more depth just if they did one more thing. And if the game has just been released and forgotten about, we don't get to do that. But if the game is being looked after and being managed, and events are being updated and improved over time, the game gets more engaging, the game gets more delightful. I think also, though, it's worth breaking up not just daily things, because they're relatively small kind of configurable items. I think we need to think about weekly activities as well. This could be, for example, in Art of War Legion, they do a collaboration event. You're trying to hunt Cerberus. Now, they've done it a little bit badly. It's too easy and it's over too quickly. The idea is that you fight Cerberus, everybody fights Cerberus. When everybody's got a grand cumulative score, Cerberus is released and you get bonus rewards. Now, that would be great, except in the moment the implementation, the last time I checked it, the implementation was over within 8 hours. And you could only replay once every 12 hours. So they kind of had this really nice idea with collaboration across multiple people, but it was over too quick and I couldn't engage in it more than once. So it was a disappointment. But the idea is fundamentally sound. What in your game gives me a thing to look forward to that lasts more than just tomorrow? What am I looking forward to the next week? How am I collaborating with other players? How do I get a sense that there is a world out there of other people who also like this game like me? That's social capital in action. That's the value of engaging, because we say, well, if other people like this game, maybe we like it for a good reason too. Then there's monthly updates. So I particularly like themes. Themes are great. I mean, Subway Surfers, I remember my claim to fame is I did 2 hours of consulting on Subway Surfer, where I basically went, this is a great game, and that was it. And I kept getting emails from Simon from Killer about how many million daily active users they had. The key thing I think that I really nailed it for me was when they started adding visiting towns and cities and countries. That ability to look forward to an activity, knowing that you're going to have a period of time, I think it was monthly with Subway Surfers, where you can unlock location and theme specific items, and that after that month was over, that was it. You couldn't get it again. Well, actually you could when you revisited a year or 2 years later. That's really smart, because I have a time limit to do all of these things. I feel like it's fresh. I know that something new is coming for the next month. It's creating excitement, engaging, commitment, and creating natural time limits, and also refreshing the experience. And I know it's predictable because every month it's going to happen. We'll get into a little bit about why predictability matters later. I think functionally as well, it's important to do updates. We'll talk a little bit about how to break that down, but functionally, small improvements can make a massive difference to a game. It could be a new mode of play. It could be a different config. It may be, I'm not talking about maps here. I'm talking about functional. You know, tournament systems is a big one. You know, we're doing that every quarter. But something where you may introduce a variation of how a tournament works, a variation on how a challenge mode works. And maybe, you know, just thinking about small functional improvements and showing that you're giving love to the game, but you show that every month. It's hard to do, though. We'll come back to why, you know, strategies to deal with that kind of pipeline later. Because one of the things that's really important is that you're still developing the game after release. You're not just producing configs and community management messages. You actually want to take lessons and data and sentiment analysis of what players are doing all the time in those events and feeding that into your content pipeline and your feature pipeline. Cadence, i.e. the frequency of activity, can be really important. Now, I've said here daily, weekly, and monthly. However, your game may not need it in the same frequency. You may find it's every 3 days, every 14 days. every 60 days. I don't know what the numbers would be. You'll find out through data and trial and error. But it's important to work out what is working and understand how it works, and so you get that magic kind of frequency and the magic type of experience to maximize the scale of the impact of your live operations. So that's events. Events, I think, is going to hopefully very clear. It's all about building engagement. So promotions. Promotions to me is all about building revenue. So we measure our KPI on promotions on how much increase in net revenue. Now, not necessarily directly, by the way. It could be an activity which then you have, say, discounts on energy crystals, whatever your game has. And we see an upsell in energy crystals because the activity in the event created more reasons for people to use those energy crystals naturally. And that still counts as a promotion. So we really want to think about how we think commercially the impact on the game. And they can be bundles, they can be one-time deals. What's I think important about a lot of these things is seeing that there's a time limit, offer ends in. There's also other things like, for example, save 50, times 15 value, 90% off, save up to 75%. These value propositions are clearly communicated. They've got to be visually stimulating and delightful. They've got to be understandable in terms of their value. So understanding how we do promotions, and again, the frequency can be daily, it can be weekly, and they can be monthly. And I think tying that into your planning for your daily, weekly, and monthly activity, or whatever the frequency you end up with, can be incredibly powerful. So I generally look to have at least one promotion linked to any specific event I do. And then I look at the schedule from those promotions to make sure that the store of the game is continuously updated. Now, obviously, when I'm talking about this, mostly I'm talking about in-app purchase. Now, that's not the only business model out there. If we have more time, I'll see how it goes. I've got a whole bunch of slides that can talk about different business models. But it could be that your whole promotion is based around one thing. Maybe it's a battle pass if you're a PC or a console game. Well, what does that battle pass do? Well, battle passes need to not just be something you feel like you have to buy because it's got great stuff in it, but also by playing more, you get more from the bundle. This is a really key part of your promotional design. And I've done previous talks where I talk about monetization design, but one of the key things is looking at the kind of items that you can sell that create better value for people to play longer. So something like a generator, or something which increases the capacity of how many power-ups you can store or how many objects you can carry. Those things are really good for ongoing maintenance of the player. They get more value the longer they play. But something like a Hat of Wonder or a Vorpal Sword, they unlock a specific activity. They're things we look forward to buying and getting access to. But actually, oddly, they're often things where the value proposition is resolved once we've bought it. So if I get the Vorpal Blade, I can now kill Jabberwockies, but Jabberwockies are really just another monster. So from after the point where I've successfully completed my first mission killing Jabberwockies, Jabberwockies are just another monster. The sword is just another weapon choice. So understanding how the different promotions, the different assets work for your game, and the value propositions based on whether it's in-app purchase, whether it's ad-based, whether it's virtual in-world ad type experiences, audio ads, whatever it might be, understanding the exchange, the player fatigue, and the value as a combined piece. And that's something we'll probably try and cover off in another separate webinar because there's so much detail we can go into there. So more important stuff for now to cover in terms of live ops, we need to think about predictable special offers. So I need to know there's an offer here and know what can come later. Today I've got an offer for free. If I get that, tomorrow I can get this other offer, which is going to get this other thing. Understanding that there are offers that are predictable, that are going to keep coming, they're going to be valuable, but also understanding how they differ. So the different life stage of the player will drive different purchase decisions. So we have to consider the life stage of the player in terms of what offers we're going to make them. So thinking about how you tie your promotions into your live operation events into the player life cycle really matters. And also, like I said earlier, the idea of saying limited lifetime offer, one-time deal, buy now, get one free, here's the value. Thinking about punctuating the routine with surprise, with, extra value. But again, I'm going to say this again and again and again. This is about understanding player utility, player value. What is going to satisfy the needs and wants of your player? If you just try to think about how to squeeze money out of your player, you are going to basically burn them. You're going to create player fatigue, and you're going to create a reason for them to churn. Instead, you need to think about why they will want to invest in the game because they're getting value. It does raise an interesting question, which I call the failure paradox, but it's something I actually learned from a whole bunch of other designers. If we keep succeeding, we've got no reason to spend. If we fail, but the failure feels like it's ours, not the game's fault, often that's a trigger for people to look for opportunities to spend. But spending is a shortcut in most cases like that. Thinking about your fail-success cycle in your game really matters, because you've got to feel like it's a challenge. If there's no challenge, I'm not going to get satisfaction from playing. If I don't get satisfaction from playing, I'm not going to feel any need to keep playing, and also no need to want to spend. So many of the games that could be really successful fail because they're either too easy, or they have no fail condition, or they don't understand that the failure needs to be the player's, not the game's fault. And that difference of ownership is really important. Again, this is probably something for another webinar, but hopefully it makes sense. Please feel free to comment, but hopefully that makes sense to you about what matters for players. So that's all about promotions. I'm going to now move on to talking about what content is. Slightly different tack here. I want you to stop thinking about levels and design content as functional pieces as content. Yes, you can have design things, so collections, so assets, customization, things like that, personalization of the experience. They can be great, but collection is often one of the main drivers. Standing out, social capital is more about other players, how we appear to other players. Other players is a great form of content. The act of collecting, the act of optimizing, the act of seeing progression are the true drivers of content. Yes, we might have assets which feed into that, but what we're trying to do is think about content in terms of what does it do to create a collection mindset for the player? What does it do to create a sense of purpose and progression for the player? How does that become endless? How does that become ongoing? Because a lot of games will cap their scale, and that's okay if that's the game you're making. But if we're starting with a clean sheet, we should be thinking about how do we avoid locking moments of gameplay? How do we create these moments of collection and value? My favorite example in collection was when the Puzzles and Dragons guys had the Sanrio characters, so Hello Kitty. Any of you have heard of Toit Vederman, a fantastic game consultant, well worth checking out. He did a great talk a few years ago around his Hello Kitty collection in Puzzles and Dragons. He is a classic hardcore gamer. You would not think of him being into Hello Kitty, but he took a huge amount of effort to make sure he had every single Sanrio character in his Puzzles and Dragons collection. And he actively shows it off because it's fun, it's exciting, and he had to work really, really hard. And the level of work he had to do and spend was part of the joy when he completed the collection. How does that work in your game? And again, progression. How do I get a sense where I can look back over my shoulder and see how far I've come, look where I've got to go, and have meaningful milestones where I can achieve a real sense of achievable goals that unlock the next achievable goal and the next achievable goal. And I can see how far I've come and see how far I've succeeded. Purpose and progression is a critical factor for long-term retention. How do we use content to drive that. I don't want to create a brand new expensive level map that only people who pay for it can access it. Because if I do, then a tiny fraction of my audience are paying for the thing that's really expensive. I'd rather have everybody play that expensive thing and get a small amount of money from all of them, from watching ads, from buying health potions, from doing score multiplier, whatever it is that drives my game forward. I want to use that level to create a sense of purpose and progression. I'm a massive fan of the hot dog economics principle. I don't know if you've heard that term before. I've forgotten where I got the term from. I think it was something like Freakonomics or Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, one of those books. So the hot dog principle is this. Hot dogs come in 8s or 10s. Hot dog buns come in 6s. Why? Because when I run out of hot dog buns, I go buy another pack of 6. Now I've got 12 hot dog buns and I've only got 8 sausages. I've got to get some more hot dog sausages to fill the buns. But now I've not got enough hot dog buns for the sausages I've now bought. I've got to buy more of them. And I know it sounds manipulation. It's not. It's just that optimization part is fantastic from the point of view of not just thinking about people spending, but actually people trying to balance an unbalanced economy is oddly satisfying, because you can improve it and feel satisfied you've got a success, and then you can twist it again. There's always something new to do. That sense of it's always got to keep it balanced. Any of you heard of the Penn and Teller game, Desert Bus, I think it's called? It's a game from the 80s, pixel-based, long time ago, and it's used. Desert Bus Simulator, I think, is used to raise money for charity, for Child's Play, I think is the name of charity in the US. So what you do in this game is you literally drive the bus from LA to Las Vegas. It's an 8-hour real-time drive. The bus constantly moves slightly to the left, so you have to constantly readjust it. There's one thing that happens in the game entirely. It's just waste of desert. Otherwise, the one thing is a bug halfway through hits the windscreen. Why am I talking about this game? It's crazy. It's stupid. The reason is that I'm always having to do something. That's the key there. It always having to do something. And that realizing that if I leave it unattended, I'm going to not be optimized. If I can improve my gameplay, if I can improve my speedrun because I optimize certain characteristics, that's really powerful. So what in content are you doing that feeds into the optimization desire of your players? Narrative. Again, love narrative. Narrative allows me to put an end to this story, start with the next story, creating this sense of purpose and progression with these core goals. Even daily moments, creating lore for your game. Even Candy Crush has a set of lore. Can you believe it? I mean, obviously, it's ridiculously simplistic. I don't even remember the name of the characters, to be honest, but it had a sense of lore. So what are you doing in your game that's going to continuously update that lore and engage players so they feel like they're going to find out what's happening next? I'm still a fan of the old 1930s, 40s Saturday matinee movies, the Flash Gordon cliffhanger, where the princess would always fall over the cliff and there'd be a scream at the end, and you'd think it was all over, and you have to come back next week and you find that she's fine, she caught a root, and Flash pulls her up and it's all good, it's all fine. But that sense of peril, that sense of imperative, that sense of moving the player forward can often be done not by having to build massively complex levels, but by building simple, engaging narrative that drives the experience, that provides context for play. And again, other players, somebody to play against, tournaments. My favorite example of this one is Golf Clash. The reason why I like Golf Clash is I think their particular implementation of tournaments is just superb. Essentially, the idea that I join a tournament of 100 people. It's a 3 to 5 day period. I get trophies for every victory I get, and even I get a trophy for participating, 1 for participating, 3 for winning. It does vary between different tournaments, but the reason why that's important is because merely by playing, I get more trophies. So the people who are not playing drop off the bottom of the chart. The people who are at the top 10%, the top 10 players, move up to the next tournament, which is the same tournament. It's just got different people in, but it's got 10 of the same people you previously played with. and maybe even has other people who previously went up you played with in weeks before that. This is the really key thing, is creating a sense of recognizable communities. There is 0 point in having a global leaderboard with 1 million people, because the sum total of people who care are the people who appear on the first page. Probably about 10 people in the world. Yes, some people are going to want to be on there. Yes, there is a driver to being engaged. But if you are, 155,000th person, you're probably never going to be on that front page. There is no motivation. In fact, it's demotivating. So creating relevance so that you can engage with other players, and using the content so that you can show off. Things like Fortnite work with customization because other people can see you and you know that you will be seen. So again, thinking about your content differently by looking at how you can build collection elements, how you can build progression elements, how you can build optimization, narrative, and maximize the value of other players. That is how we think about content. And again, it's about put content out there, look at the data, look at the effect on the bottom line and the retention, and then you can improve and improve. So hopefully, we've dealt with events, we've dealt with promotions, we've dealt with content now. So the last piece really is looking at features. So what are features? Well, they can be any number of things. A new mount system, introduction of the Team Rocket in Pokemon Go. It could be just improvements to the way a garage works in Hill Climb Racer. There are a number of different things. It doesn't have to be the biggest update ever. It can be simple things. In fact, actually, it's better if it's simple things. But an ongoing attention to the technical debt of your game, an ongoing attention to the user experience in your game, and an ongoing release of small moments really matters. James is just commenting here that he likes how Pokemon Go instantly creates 3 teams based on color. So simple, immediately creates community and competition. Basically, tribes you're born in. Absolutely, totally agree. In fact, 3 is a really important number in that context, because 2 is too binary. I know it's obvious, but if you're going to compete in an area for a gym, and there's only a choice of you versus them, there's nothing really interesting. It gets too dominated by one side or another. But if you've got 3, it's nice and even. It's nicely split. So there's much more challenge, much more dynamism. So that's a great example of this hot dog optimization I've been talking about. So features. So when I was back in the day working on PlayStation Home, I was home architect there of Virtual World. Well, first free-to-play experience on console. Well, first big free-to-play experience on console back in 2008. So this is kind of the way we looked at content and feature pipelines. Now, actually, it's slightly disingenuous. The content was actually done by third parties in terms of the PlayStation Home. But in general, when I've worked with teams, I use this model to think about how you engage your development resources. So I try to split them into 2 parts, content and feature, completely separate. Content is non-code, generally. Sometimes scripting, depending on the interactive nature of content. But generally, I'm looking at non-development, non-feature code for content. So I tend to break it down into the 3 months. So I'll do a plan for a quarter. Within each quarter, I'll break it down into 3 themes, 1 for each of the forthcoming months. And then within each of those themes, I'll think of 4, maybe 5, obviously depending on the month. But in general, let's say it's 4 for ease. Then I'll be thinking about what content is going to be week 1's release in that theme. What content is going to be week 2, week 3, week 4. So for each of the themes, it's broken down into what content will be released each week. Now, if that's my planning, what that means is that I've got one art style per month I'm thinking about, and I'm producing enough content to release something each week. That predictable relationship between the theme being a monthly, here's what's happening over the month, and the weekly, this is what's happening each week, means that I've already got built into my plans a release schedule which allows people to know they are certainly going to have something happen each week, and that has got something that's going to affect you next month as well. And thinking in these patterns and designing your development schedule so you build less things, but more predictably, more reliably, means that you'll get a better pulse for your game, which will drive better retention. There's an absolute connection between the predictability and the retention. And also features. So typically I'll break down feature development into 3 parts. So any ongoing development for the game, try to put about 1/3 of your time into bug fixing. I know it sounds silly, but there's always tech debt. There's always improvements needed because some plugins change, because Unity's been updated, because there's been new devices coming in, but also underlying technical problems that you're going to discover over time. And you're not going to be able to get to them all the time. Making sure you're constantly on your tech debt really matters. And it is almost the most, well, it is the most frequently forgotten part of LiveOps, is making sure your dev team constantly fix that. The other 1/3 is improving the user experience. That means is always looking at the first time, second time, and lapsed user experience. So I'm not just interested in the first time user experience. Of course, that's really key, especially in the early days. I'm also interested in the second time user experience. So I don't want people coming in, having done the first time user experience, to feel frustrated. I want the smooth, exciting experience where they get to the bits that they need for the game at the time they need it. When they already understand it, they don't need to learn again. And also the lapsed user, where somebody has gone away, come back a month later, 3 months later, whatever it might be. The biggest hurdle there is they don't want to go through the onboarding again in entirety, but they've probably forgotten some of the nuances. So what is your lapsed user experience? How do you deal with optimizing that? If you're going to re-engage your audiences, how do you make sure you know what they need? And again, it's look what they do, look at the sentiment analysis of what they say, and then design accordingly. So then you're left with only 1/3 of your development schedule to look at features. I know it sounds terrible, because actually, think about that. That's so small. That's such a small amount. But you want to have a feature released every month. If you don't do that, you're not going to get that momentum, that sense of improvement that you need. So thinking about smaller features, simpler things, things that you can release over time. Yes, you might find ways, for example, if you did a tournament management system and then you did configurations on that tournament management system so that it felt like a new feature, that's okay. That's legit. That's a way to be able to get bigger features in. But, this is where a lot of teams end up, if you're of the scale of game, or you can do it, where you'll have a second development team who are working purely on the bigger features. But that's something only really the biggest teams can afford. Double teaming, keeping people on the right thing. And a lot of it comes down to managing the development team and making sure they continue to be motivated and continue to be engaged. You can't do crunch with development teams on LiveOps. You kill the game. So that's kind of how I like to think about features. Hopefully that's been interesting and useful. I'm going to just talk a little bit about predictable surprise and what I mean by that. Have you all heard of Columbo? It's a 1970s detective show, quite famous at the time. The guy here, Peter Falk, was the eponymous detective. My favorite, actually, I can't bear watching it anymore. I hate to admit it, but it's true. It is still one of the most influential and important TV shows. I'm going to get to that, Jared. Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the most important TV shows ever. And people like Stephen Fry famously says it's the best TV show ever made. And the reason is this. So this is a whodunit where you see who did it. You see the guy who did the murder. You see the person, whoever it is. You see the murderer commit the murder at the beginning of the show. So you already know who did it. So why would you watch a whodunit when you know who did it? It's because you're watching the detective. It's much more interesting to watch the character you're familiar with and see if you can predict how he will solve it. And you've got a time limit. And as Joran said, I don't know, I can't pronounce your name, I'm afraid. But anyway, the key thing is near the end, about 5 minutes before the end of the show, Columbo says to the killer, just one more thing. That is the magic moment. At that point, your time is up. You have to know how Columbo solved it. And he'll have done lots of ridiculous things. He'll gone over it, picked up some cigarette butts, which happened to be twisted, and others which weren't twisted. And that was the key reason why he knew how to solve it. That's what you're trying to do. So what that does is it means that everybody is looking at everything in the game. Or in our case, it's a game. In that case, it's a TV show. They're not just looking at the things we intentionally put there. They're looking at everything we put in place in the game, and they're looking at if that's the reason why they're playing. If that's our mindset, if that's how we build our content, our features, our events, our promotions, if we build that in our mindset, then we can have this predictable surprise, whereas delight that comes at a moment we know it's coming. That is incredibly motivating. That's what drives retention. There's another factor which is really tied in, and I'm going to talk about my my favorite game of all. Actually, it's not my favorite game of all. I know I'm exactly the right demographic for this, but Kim Kardashian Hollywood is the best example I've found to date of explaining unfinished business. I would love somebody to give me a new example. Although it is quite funny when I talk about Kim Kardashian all the time. It really annoys my business partner because she's heard this story hundreds of times. So if you haven't played Kim Kardashian Hollywood, basically what it is an idle clicker. But the way it does is it breaks down. So here's a catwalk, and it breaks down. So you see that spotlight, 2 taps. And if I click the other blue things, I'll get something similar, like strut, 5 taps. Or it might be pose, 7 taps. Each tap is a point of energy. If you look at the top there, the lightning bolt with 13, that's how much energy I have. Typically, a photo shoot or a catwalk takes me around 47 odd energy. And I only have around 38, 40. There's never enough energy to complete the mission. But in that, they've all had these goals of 2 to 7 in terms of energy unit. So that means I've been working on this thing for like a minute and a half, tapping, 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 tapping. Next thing, tapping, small momentary successes where I see progress, tap, 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 success, tap, 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 success. But I can't finish. I've got to come back tomorrow and finish it. Or 4 hours later when the energy would have replenished. Or I maybe spend some money. The point is the sensation. If you want to understand the sensation of unfinished business that you're trying to recreate, play Kim Kardashian Hollywood. Don't necessarily be as extreme on the commercialization of that, but think about what that game does and how that could apply to your game. Don't make that game. That's been done. Think about the lessons you can learn from that game. So I think unfinished business and predictable surprise, that is really kind of the core to thinking about how you build engagement. I think also part of that is making sure you've got the right kind of game. And I like to break a game down into 3 component parts: the mechanic, the context, and the metagame. A lot of people call the context loop meta. I think that's wrong because meta is outside. That's the root of the name of the word meta, is that it's not part of. Anyway, so the mechanic is the start condition, the challenge, the resolution, the reward. The context is that old doozy, the purpose and regression I talked about. But it's also the economy, the imbalancing, the optimization that we were talking about before. It's also the narrative. And it's also the anticipation, which is where we get our predictable surprise and our unfinished business. That sense of anticipation, I must go play. I'm looking forward to going play that game. We all know what it feels like. How are you designing it into your game? How is your live ops driving that in your game? And then why do we keep playing in the long run? Well, that's about understanding the roles of social engagement, the lifestyle fit of the player. Understanding your audience matters. Are they sitting on the toilet with their mobile phone playing your game? Or are they retreating to their den with their PC and having a completely immersed experience for 6 hours? Making sure that your game fits to their lifestyle and the mode of use that's appropriate to the device, because the phone is different from the PC, is different from the console. But also, what's the cultural zeitgeist in your game? What's the water cooler moment? What's that thing that you share with other people? How are you going to create that moment to capture and release? And thinking about how your game breaks down into those 3 structures can be incredibly powerful, and particularly for live ops, because We can know if a game can work with LiveOps if we have these things in place. But I think the key thing about LiveOps for me is actually understanding that it's actually about continuous improvement. There's a model that was designed by NASA and Pillsbury for the Apollo mission. So we could feed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and oh, I'm terrible, I can never remember the third guy's name. Anyway, the Apollo 11 astronauts got fed because of this process, where they looked at the whole delivery of food to the astronauts as a flow. And particularly the end part, because you can't tear apart the food packet and know it's safe, because the moment you've torn it apart, you've made it no longer hermetically sealed, and therefore it's no longer safe. So you have to make sure that you step backwards through the process and work out what were the things that could go wrong, where can we test it, how do we identify what good looks like, and how do we correct? So in games, I try to apply this methodology for our data models. So how we design data capture, how we use sentiment analysis, how we use things like market data. So we're big fans of things like reflection and game refinery to help us understand what good looks like in terms of the market context, and then comparing that with our in-game data, whatever tools we're using for that, and then comparing that maybe with things like fan census, where we're looking at social impact of our activities. But I look at all sorts of ways of collecting data, and I look at that as a flow of the player journey. Where are the player decisions? What are the decisions that matter? And how do I test where they're making good and bad decisions? What does success look like? That's where funnel analysis can be really powerful. But the important part of this flow is understanding that you have to identify what good looks like, work out how you implement corrective procedures where something's wrong and something's not working, and then you review the process itself. Not just review the game and the live ops of it, but review the way you do live ops and implement improvements to the way that you do live ops, where you do delivery of development. How do you do that? How do you improve the process of development? So HACCP to me is a method that's really useful to think about your live ops business, because it drives the way we think. It drives the way we work for continuous improvement. And one of the biggest complaints we have from people is that they don't think that they're ready for live ops because they're not live yet. So why would they think about live ops? That to me is a massive red flag. It's almost inviting failure. However, you know, that's the way it is. So what I think you need to think about is in your concept stage, prototyping, GDD, whatever it might be, you've got to think about how is the game going to operate in live. You've got to think about it. Don't do anything about it yet. Think about it. Does your game have repeatable, extensible gameplay? You're not going to work in live if you don't. So why are you not thinking about that in the game design stage? It's so much more expensive to retrofit this stuff. But I wouldn't say impossible, it's incredibly difficult. What's the way that you're going to scale the longevity of that game? Does it have scale potential? Does it have longevity potential? You need to think about that before you start coding. Then in development, you've got to think about your data design model. You think about your back-end setup and implementation, and how much configuration access are you going to give to your live team? Because that's how they're going to be able to run events. If you haven't got a back-end, you can't run events. If you haven't got an event, a back-end that you can run and manage and maintain, you can't run events. If you don't have configuration tools available to your developers, you can't run events. So making sure that you know what your team can do can massively improve your success. And also understanding how you test and use your team to test things. As you get ready for launch, test and release processes matter. I think that only the live ops team should touch the live and staging environments. I think the dev team should hand over to live ops and then have the live ops team test in live before they ever release it to a player. And it should be the live ops team who, through an event, activates any new features and content. You've got to think about your content pipeline. Norris, George, hopefully catch up with you later. We'll send out a recording and the slides to everybody as well. And also you've got to test your live ops process as well. And then finally, when you're in live, you need that pipeline of events, that pipeline of content and promotion and features. And you need to look at your data capture. You need to analyze the community information through sentiment analysis and have an audience-led decision process for your design and prioritization. So it's never too early to think about live ops, but what you have to cover is different. depending on what stage you're at. Hopefully that's been useful. Essentially, what I think you need is a love for live. You need to have a love for your player, and it's that love which is what's going to drive players' engagement with you and their value with you. And I think that's what really drives retention at the end of the day. It's not about squeezing people for money. It's about engaging them with things that they care about, that they want to spend money on, that they want to play more of, and they want to tell their friends about. That's how we get success. That's why LiveOps is a scale engine that's much more successful than just focusing on user acquisition. So if you want to know what Fundamentally Games do, we are a relatively new company, although I've been working in LiveOps for 22 years, consulting on it for a lot of that time, particularly over the last 9 years. We started as a brand new company in April with a small seed round, specifically to offer LiveOps services for teams. Particularly what we're looking at is providing the design and delivery of events and promotions, the scheduling, planning, analysis, and all the production support and data support needed to do that. That means that we can free up game developers to focus on doing what they do best, which is create their content and features, but they'll be doing that informed by the insight that we've gathered through the live operations process. So we're not interested in game IP, and we're very happy working with publishers as well. So we're talking to a number of publishers. Now we see publishers' focus being on marketing and user acquisition, and also on the publishing operations, and potentially also funding it. And James, don't worry, we'll be showing this stuff out. At the end of the day, though, we also have, just so you know, started working with a couple of funding organizations. So if anyone is specifically looking for user acquisition funding, from a kind of UA loan point of view, we're actually working with a couple of teams on that. So please feel free to talk to us if you are looking for UA funding. So that's how we fit into the ecosystem. So we are kind of like a publisher, but we're not. We're publishers focus on recruitment and audience. We're focusing on retention and monetization. We've also got a whole bunch of free resources out there. So you can look at our events calendar, which is keeping track of all the activity. So many actions going online. We're trying to keep track of all of those for game developers. There's also a financer list. So if you're looking to raise money, again, we work with a couple of financiers, particularly in the UK around SEIS and EIS funding, and also user acquisition loans. And then also we've got a knowledge base. Things like this webinar all goes into our website, and so we can provide lots of resources which you can see all for free. We also do a free game review. So if you want somebody to look at your game and break down your pitch, whether it's a publisher or an investment pitch, we can look at your market fit for the game mechanic, the retention design, the monetization design, and we've just started, particularly around the user acquisition funding, to do marketing plan reviews. So looking at the campaigns you've got planned, where you're planning to spend your money, and trying to see if we can help you understand how to optimize it. We don't do user acquisition ourselves, but we do support teams doing that. So that's what we do as kind of free stuff. And basically that's it. So hopefully that's been useful, interesting. I'm very happy to take questions as long as you guys want to keep talking. Obviously I'll have to eat and do the second webinar at some point, but I'm sure you'll all be done by then. Thomas, yeah, Dead Trigger 2, I remember Dead Trigger 2. Combine events and contests, winner announcements, tournaments on Facebook. Yes, absolutely. When I talk about community stuff in general, I look at community as being inside the game and outside the game. So I think that the people who are managing the game should be using all of the communication tools that are available to them. You can do specific events that are literally only available on the social media side. But the aim is you're looking for ways of creating connection between in-game players and out-of-game players. The more you can create visibility of the people who are playing the game to the people who are admiring the game or part of the community game online, whether it's Discord, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's whatever else, creating that sense of engagement and community. You know, I mean, TikTok's been really interesting, but of course TikTok's got all sorts of questions around it at the moment. So creating community really matters. And again, you know, how you capture that, as so Jaron was just saying, you know, the value is captured by Discord because Pocket Gamer has 0 social features. Absolutely right, completely correct. And again, I think finding ways to integrate those community services inside the game to drive that flow between outside game and inside the game is really going to be matter. Yeah, if John Hankey doesn't get chocolate and flowers from Discord every week, he should. I think you're absolutely right. So Max, first order on topics for you. Everything was clean and so great. That's great to hear. Does anyone have any questions though? I mean, obviously there's a whole bunch of other areas. Obviously, please feel free to send us questions before and afterwards. Yeah, Gerald, you're right. It's a body part. Ugh, it doesn't come off. Oh, wait. Yeah. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of areas there. And if you're interested in how we work as well, please feel free to reach out. I think, Martin, you were asking about costs. In general, we work on a revenue share basis. So we can do things like workshops. And so we do a lot of workshops on things like monetization design, game design, LiveOps scheduling, things like that. But what we're really looking forward to doing is working with teams where we're working with them as partners. So we tend to work on a revenue share basis. So basically it's a waterfall. So we can show you the details directly, but the idea is that there's a percentage for scheduling and a percentage for delivery. Some people will just do the scheduling part. Some people will just do the delivery. Well, we'll do both the delivery and scheduling part. We can provide a team who will put bums on seats, who will understand your game and your community and work with you to build that. They will use your tone of voice, but we will hire them. We work remotely with people to do exactly that. And so basically we'll take a percentage basis for that. And the percentage basically declines when you hit kind of key milestones, like $1 million turnaround annual revenue to $5 million revenue to $10 million revenue. There's different percentages. So happy to explain a bit more about that. Our key objective of doing a revenue model is that we want to basically make it so it's easier for developers to get started with us, and where we're committed to the success of the game. So I think it's really important that as a team that we're really providing you with ongoing engagement and success so that you're getting the best out of our team. Yes, so basically just going to try and go through the questions. So any tips on technology that you need? So Sunny was asking this offline. Happy to set up a call if you want something, but essentially there are lots of tools out there. We've been using things like GameSparks, PlayFab, Chili Connect. At the moment, PlayFab is probably our preference, although there are issues in terms of data output if you're going to use that. We've used various data tools, game analytics, Delta DNA, Game of Wales. There are various tools out there we can talk to you about. From a market analysis point of view, we're also particularly interested in Game Refiner and reflections data to get comparisons of what other games do. But in the back end, you need a tool that you can use. Something like a GameSparks or a Chili Connect is a really good way to do that, because it's all built into the game and therefore accessible to your game team. We're actually looking at maybe later on along the line building tools to integrate with those platforms to make the running of that process easier. But yes, back end is really key. You could build your own, but generally there's enough out there. Like I say, Extra Life. There's so many. I won't even try. Fortunately, I know most of the people who build them, so that's kind of helps. It's one of the advantages of being in the industry for 22 years. So yes, Alex, we will be sharing the presentation. The video recording will be shared as well, so anyone can catch up with that. Eventually, we're going to put it all onto YouTube, but we'll share it to this group first. So there's normally a delay of about a couple of weeks or so before we release it more widely. Yes, Lance, we definitely have to catch up. We keep talking about that. I'm actually not currently on the Game for Change festival just because there's so much going on. Content optimization. So what I mean by that is optimization is a way of looking at content. So what I'm saying by that is if I have a resource, so I'm going to harvest plants, and I've got to decide whether I'm going to put more seeds in, water the plants, or fertilizer. Thinking about how much of each I need to balance out, how much soil, how much plants, how much soil, seeds, fertilizer, water. I've got to put a number of these things in. I can have a ratchet mechanism. So, I've got to upgrade one of them before I can add to the others to get higher yield. or I've got to find for each plant a different ratio of fertilizer, water, and soil to get the right outcome. So that's what I mean by optimization, is thinking about the content and thinking about how the players have to think strategically or tactically to get the best out of that experience. So, for example, one of my favorite things is degrading weapons. So I'm a massive fan of Fallout. I thought Fallout 76 was going to be terrible. I've just started playing it. I'm loving it. I know it's glitched, but they've done a lot of work on it. I've got to think about basically fixing my weapons constantly. And then I've got to go and find aluminium. I've got to go find steel. I've got to get springs. I've got to get screws. All of these resources have different rarities, but I need them all to do the upgrades and to do the fixes and repairs. That's optimization. So hopefully that makes sense. So next up is Mark. So Martin, post your review. Yes. So the review is free. Workshops and so on and so forth may be recommended as part of that review. That's up to you if you take them. We do charge for our workshops, but often we'll find a way to help if you end up working with us on LiveOps. And again, the spend, LiveOps is a revenue share specifically to minimize the upfront payment, because we know that's hard for a lot of developers. Bob, yes, we'll catch up offline, and that's good. Difference between new content and new features. So again, content is essentially, if you think about content as something I collect, so something I can show off, or it could be a new way of playing, a mode of play, but a mode that doesn't require development time. So a configuration of the game as it already exists can be content. But if I have to use dev time to make something new, that's a feature. Hopefully that makes a kind of principle of why those things function differently. So content is stuff that you need artists for, maybe scripters, but not coders. Whereas features are things which affect the underlying game engine, game mechanic that you're working with, game system, and that requires developers to make. Yeah, Chris, you mentioned, in particular what I was talking about was looking at promotions. So I was thinking there, I probably should do a specific talk around how I don't know if you know, I did a talk on the seven rules of monetization design, where I looked at the specific mechanisms and a framework I have for designing monetization. And I'm thinking of redoing that, but in the context of LiveOps. So how we look at new promotional activities and we feed that into events and so on and so forth. When will that come? Well, I can't promise right now. We're trying to do webinars roughly every month. But if there's an event like Pocket Gamer where we're already doing lots of talks, we tend not to do that then. But yeah, we're definitely looking to do roughly monthly events, and we're filling in the gaps between Pocket Gamer events with webinars, basically. I'm actually looking to get some of the other team to do some. So Ella did a couple earlier this year on funding. We've got Glenn, our game design analyst, is looking to do one on the use of data and game design. And Emily is looking at one on promotion. Sorry, on production, sorry. So general production techniques. So we'll see which one of those comes out next. Yes, thanks very much, Chris, on the challenge and understanding the challenge, etc. It is absolutely key. And the difficulty is that when you have games like Farmville, which historically, back in 2007, people were saying, you don't need failure for a game. But I think they were making a fundamental mistake. And unfortunately, a lot of designers still think that's true. The fundamental mistake is they thought there was no challenge in Farmville. The challenge was, I want other people to think well of me when they visit my farm. That was what fail conditions were. That's a much more profound social failure than whether I fail a score or a level or not. So understanding that is a driver to spend is a fundamental design principle, which I think, we all have to pay attention to. So what else have we got? I think that's it. So is anyone else got any last minute questions? I'm very happy to answer them. Oh, here we go. Sorry, there's a couple of extra ones that have come through. How do you build a content calendar? Well, that's our secret sauce. So essentially how we do it, and you know, obviously at the moment it's mostly a massive spreadsheet, but basically what you're looking at is the resources available to you. You're doing production kind of, we tend to look at Kanban, but it's like a variation of Kanban that also uses a waterfall. So for those of you who don't know, waterfall or Prince methodology is where you got a feature list and you scale down. But so we kind of look at a feature list that is broken down over themes. So each quarter, we're looking at a kind of quarterly production plan. We have high-level achievable goals, and we're using sprint style Kanban generally, build processes, generally looking at week level or 2 week level sprints. And the aim is that basically what we're doing is creating, as I said before, a schedule. The idea is that we prioritize based on a combination of behavioral data, so gameplay data, and audience sentiment. We're trying to make sure that anything we build is driven by the insight of our game design analyst and also managed by our producer. So we have our producer working with your team, your development team, and your development producer to make sure that we've got scoping done correctly to fit into the available time, to make sure we've got prioritization done correctly so that we focus on getting a predictable release each month for features and a predictable release each week for content. And then we build a scheduling timeline that includes all the marketing material for the events and activities, event design, promotion design, again, all the configs required for those, and we build that into a massive spreadsheet so that on the day, then a community admin can sit there and see exactly what they need to do for that game that's going to be triggered for that week, that month, and that day. And so that makes it a lot simpler. The community admin can then manage what's happening on that day. They already know everything's been signed off because it wouldn't get to them if they didn't get signed off. And then we go from there. Yeah, so that's going to cost you a percentage. We actually are planning to build software around it to make it easier as well. And then potentially licensing all that. So the next question, actually we work together with the development team on setting up the LiveOps. Absolutely, yeah. So to Gerald's question, what we do is generally provide support and advice. So we know what you need to do with it. We let your dev team be the specialist and actually implementing it because it's about your game. But we'll tell you the things that you need to consider. So we're basically mostly from a design point of view, although we can do more information than that as well. So, you know, we provide a bit more technical support, but generally we don't tend to do technical support for games. We actually have a business partner called Zamidian who do DevOps as a service. So that means they keep an eye on your servers to make sure the servers are still running, your backend is still running, and get you back up and running as quickly as possible. That's not an area we're specialist in, but we do know what you need to set up. So your data model, the activities and events, what events you need to expose to your develop your LiveOps team. We'll work with you all that setting up. And again, to your point, what is the early stage we start working with? Well, we provide advice from the concept. In fact, we actually have a couple of projects where we did the design of the game. They had an idea. There were generally people who haven't worked in games, and these are actually legacy projects from our consulting time that we're now transitioning into live. Essentially, we did the original game design. We've done the setup. We've done the config. So we definitely were happy to help anyone at every stage, but I don't want you to feel like it's a burden. The key thing is that we just want you to ask the right questions. And the right answers come from you knowing what success looks like to you. It comes from knowing what your audience is. It comes from knowing how you expect to maintain and sustain the game, and also how replayable and extensible the gameplay is. Extensible is a really interesting kind of point. Extensible is things like a game like Plank. Plank, hyper casual, very simple game. You tap on the screen and hold. The length of time you hold for is how long the plank grows for. If you release too soon, you fall over. If you release too late, you fall over. You're aiming to release just right. So there's an extensibility, which is I am making a deliberate tactical implementation choice and my skill matters. That is a key factor to successful games. Similarly, that fact that that does that, what is the extensibility over the long term? What's the equivalent of that for a week's play? What's the equivalent of that for a month's play? And we try to help you work all those things out in the concept stage. But if you're already at concept, you've nailed the game down, great. If you're in development, that's fine. We can come in and help you with your actually designing the data model, thinking about the back end, looking at the implementation, looking at your testing strategies, looking about the environments you've got. There's a whole bunch of work that goes on there. And then obviously in live, we look at schedules and so on and so forth. Cool, that's great stuff, Gerald. In terms of examples, I mean, there are so many good examples of it. You can talk about, you know, Clash Royale, you can talk about Clash of Clans, you can talk about most of the Scope League content, you can talk about all the big boys. But I think actually learning some of the lessons from the others, I try not to talk too much about other people's specific games because I don't necessarily know what's going on in the back end. Or if I do, I'm not allowed to because of NDAs. So I'm a bit kind of nervous about saying specific examples. But what I try to do is pull out specific moments. But happy to talk about a game and try and break down why I think they work. You know, if that's useful. Martin, yeah, looking forward to getting a message. Great stuff, Gerald. Hopefully speak to you soon. And what's the no, no. I think that, yeah, most valuable metric. Oh, right. Okay. So my favorite metric of all time is repeat spender, percentage of repeat spenders. Now, the reason for that is if you have a large repeat spender, if it's going up, you're doing something right. Because if you manage to get players coming in and they're enjoying the game and they keep playing and they keep spending ongoing, that's amazing. I'm also a fan of return on advertising spend, particularly because it's a great measure about how much you're spending in terms of engagement. I'm actually working out some analytics at the moment to try and gauge how to test the effectiveness of UA spend best. You know, so I'm trying to think about factors like the K factor, where if you do a lot of advertising and marketing of your game, you shouldn't just be increasing the number of players, you should be increasing the number of organic installs as well as the paid installs. So I'm trying to think about ways of measuring that. So virality, often people use the K factor as a way to describe that, which is a statistical measure. So I'm looking at that, but I'm trying to think if there's other ways of doing that. So K factor is a really interesting one. I'm also exploring how to start pulling in data from, yeah, I know. But that's why I'm toying. It's a great idea. It's whether it's a good measure. That's the problem. I'm toying with a number of things about looking at the way tools like fan census work, looking at your PR and your above the line marketing activities. Yeah, always happy to do that. I got a number of ideas, but it's complicated. I don't want you and I know what we're talking about. I suspect we'd lose quite a lot of people. So I'm also looking at things like how do we fit in some of those wider measures as well, and integrate. How can I find a parallel between App Store data that, you know, like a Game Refinery or a Reflections might give me? How can I look at things like fan census, looking at sentiment analysis inside of community messaging, sentiment analysis inside of in-game messaging, and comparing that to in-game gameplay data and user acquisition cohorts. And if I can find a way to provide a path through all of that data, then I might have some interesting metrics. But essentially, if I'm going to pick one, I'm going to pick repeat spender. I'd love to know what Jeroen thinks. Chris, no problem. Looking forward to chatting again more. Cool. I think that's us done. Has anyone got any last minutes? 20 minutes past. That's not too bad. Cool. All right, mate. I'll do that. It's been ages. So thanks all, and hopefully that was interesting. You can contact us. You can check us out. Email us, and obviously you can steal my hat again. Really glad you guys all enjoyed it, and obviously we'll share up the video, the slides, and everything else. So great talking to you all. Hopefully that was all useful. And again, you know, remember, it's all about love. Love for the players, love for live. Thanks very much.